listening to the Fighting Families podcast with Preston Cave. We are in a spiritual battle, and we have a real enemy. That enemy is not our family. It's the goal of this podcast to help you fight for the family. And now, welcome your host, the Mission and Discipleship Coordinator for TBM, Preston Cave.
Hey, and welcome to this week's episode of the Fighting Families podcast. My name is Preston Cave, and I will be your host. And today we have an extremely special guest with us, all the way from Granbury, Texas, my beautiful bride, Sarah D. Sarah,
Hello.
welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And for those of you who are watching or listening, the day that you are watching or listening to this is not our anniversary, but today, as we record this, it is our anniversary.
Yes.
So happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
19 years.
19 years ago, we said I do.
Man, that's exciting. Well, listen, today's episode is not going to be about anniversaries. It's not going to be about marriage, although we will have some episodes about that in the future, I hope. But today's episode really is going to be focused on homeschooling, remote learning, and just education in general, because I know that that's a really touchy subject right now. A lot of people, we really don't know what the future holds with this COVID situation. There was an article that came out, I guess just this last week in New York Times, talking about how more and more schools are either pushing back the start time for education or for this year, or are starting to do remote learning.
Right.
And so we need to really kind of talk about this situation. And you being a teacher, you teach second grade, you have an education major.
Mm-hmm.
And so we thought that it would be really cool for you to come on the show, talk to us a little bit about education, talk to us a little bit about homeschooling, because we, for those of you who are listening, we have homeschooled our oldest son, but we're public schooling our youngest son. So we kind of are a little different.
We're half and half.
Yeah.
We have two boys. The first one we homeschooled, and the youngest one, he's in public school. He'll be in fourth grade this year.
So if you like coffee and you like half and half, there you go. That's us. We're half and half. Cheesy joke. All right. Well, so here's what we're going to do. Because we know that there are a lot of parents out there who are praying about, trying to figure out, having conversations with other people and other parents about whether or not they should homeschool or what they should do this next year. We're going to talk about that in this episode. So I guess I'm just going to let you be the expert today and talk to us a little bit about education, talk to us a little bit about homeschooling, and what are some steps that we need to take in that regard. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, like Preston said earlier, one of the things that are on parents' mind right now is how do they want to school their child? Because of the rising pandemic of COVID-19, a lot of parents are kind of leaning towards the idea of maybe keeping their children at home while they homeschool them. There are different ways that you can do that. I know a lot of school districts are giving the parents the choice. What do they want to do? Do they want to send their child to school? And if you do, rest assured that schools all around the nation are taking those necessary steps to keep your child safe. Yeah,
let me stop just real quick and say this. Listeners, you need to know this, that, I'm not saying this just because my wife is in education, but we've got a lot of friends who are in education, whether either a teacher or in administrative roles. And it's tough. It's tough, not just for us as parents, but it's tough for our educators. And they're doing the best that they can with what they have. They're doing the best they can with the situation. So I'm just going to quickly say this. I want to encourage you to say a prayer for your administration right now. Say a prayer for your teachers right now. And the last thing that they need from us as parents is to be a jerk to them. Because they're having it rough too. We are all going through this together. So I want to do a quick side note and do a quick plug for our teachers out there. So congratulations. Good job, teachers. I want to give you a pat on the back.
Well, I have to say, personally, I'm blessed. I have had the best parents of my students. So, and I know a lot of teachers do. So thank you, parents, as well. Yeah. So if you're thinking about homeschooling your child, there are some things that you want to consider. First, and I'm just going to tell you, we're just going to kind of go through some steps of where to start. How can you navigate making that decision from point A to point B.
Yeah.
The first thing, number one, we put on our list, we made a list here. Number one, pray. Pray, not just one prayer, keep praying about, okay, do I feel God calling me as a parent to homeschool my child or my children? And then ask why. There are different reasons why parents pull their children out of public school to homeschool, or sometimes they just start their children off homeschooling for very many different reasons. Like we said earlier, right now, your reason might be because you feel convicted that you feel your child just might be a little more safer at home, more safe, not safer, more safe at home.
Come on, education major.
Another reason is you might be feeling some spiritual pull, some spiritual conviction.
Yeah, and I'll say this. First off, you said we made a list. You made a list because that's
I'm a
you.
list person.
Yeah, but when we're talking about this praying aspect and then asking the question why, you're right. There are different reasons why. Some people have that conviction of they're like, well, gosh, the COVID situation, I don't know what this next year looks like, so I'm just going to go ahead and be consistent and start my kids off at home from the very beginning, knowing that maybe that's going to end up happening at the end of the school year anyway. Some of you might be looking at this because you have a spiritual conviction, like I really feel like I need to be the one educating my kiddos. And some of you just maybe have a problem with public school. Well, there's a lot of reasons why. And, my wife and I both, we homeschooled our oldest son he was in fifth grade?
Sixth grade.
Sixth grade. He was sixth grade
and
when
he
we
just
decided
graduated.
to homeschool.
We homeschooled him from sixth grade to 12th grade, and now he's going to college.
Yeah. And our youngest son, who's 9 years old and who is going into fourth grade, we probably will never homeschool him because each kid is different. And so that was some of our why of homeschooling. But I'll say this for those of you who are saying, I feel like there's a spiritual conviction. I feel like I need to be more involved. You don't have to homeschool in order to be more involved, right?
We know a lot of very godly parents who public school their children,
and they're super involved.
Exactly. And a lot of parents, they use the public school system as their mission field, and they teach their children how to witness and how to set good examples in their mission field, which is the public school system.
Yeah. So I'll say this, just because you choose to maybe public school your child doesn't mean that you're less spiritual than someone who private schools or homeschools their child. But at the same time, I would encourage you to pray about homeschooling.
Absolutely.
If you feel like that's what God has wanted. God wanted us to homeschool our oldest, and we know that for sure. So we were faithful to that call.
That leads us into step number 2. If you're considering homeschooling your child, is know your child. Know what type of learner your child is. Can they thrive better in a classroom full of students, or do they thrive better with a 1-to-1 student to teacher ratio? What's their personality? Do they need that interaction with students that are their age, or do they do better just kind of by themselves, or just with 1 or 2 or 3 others in their classroom?
And how do they learn, right? Like
exactly.
hands-on,
are they
or
hands-on? Are they tactile? You could accomplish that at home as well.
Yeah.
And where would they thrive best? That's a part of our testimony. Our oldest son thrives best in a homeschool situation. We cater to his learning needs. So you'll have to know how to cater to your child's individual learning needs. We have 2 children. Both of them are very, very different. One of them thrives better homeschool. The other thrives better public school. Another thing is know yourself as a parent. What is your schedule going to look like? Are you up for the challenge of homeschooling? There are some sad stories where some parents, they decided to take their child out of public school to homeschool just to try it out, but they didn't necessarily do their research. And then they brought them back to school the next year, and their students they had fallen behind. So you have to know what's expected out of you.
I can tell that you're a second grade teacher because you're talking to me like I'm a second grade student. I love
I'm
it.
sorry.
That's awesome. When you shift into education mode, you start talking like a second grade teacher. But you're right. One thing that I think is important for us to mention right now is if you're planning on homeschooling or you're praying about it, and you choose to homeschool, be consistent. Don't pull them out for a year or two and then realize how difficult it is, because you didn't count the cost, and then you put them back in, because sometimes that messes things up. We'll talk a little bit more about the curriculum that you could choose
Yeah.
if you decide to homeschool, and that will be
Yeah.
a part of that
Yeah, we're
conversation.
definitely going to give you guys some hands-on things that you could take with you. This is not a in theory discussion. We're going to give you some tools to take with you.
And we're not experts. I'll say this at all.
Not at
We
all.
are far from being an expert on this. We just know that we've done both, So yeah.
So we're just trying to help you out. That leads us into number 3, do your research. Whatever state you live in, make sure that you know and understand their curriculum standards. We live in Texas, and so ours is called the TEKS, T-E-K-S.
What does
That stands for Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. There's a website that you can view that on. It's tea.texas.gov. And that gives you all the standards, all the skills and concepts that your child needs to go from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade.
Now, I'll say this. Whenever we looked at that website earlier, it was overwhelming.
It
we clicked on some of those
like
things.
A daunting task. Yes, yeah. There's pages and pages. That leads us into our next point under do your research is you can ask friends who has been homeschooling their children. Yeah. What do they use for their homeschool curriculum? Many people have asked us, what do we use? And the biggest thing that we look for when we are looking at the best homeschool curriculum for our oldest son is, does it align with, for Texas, the TEKS, our curriculum standards? Does it align with that? So do your research. Now, I'll say this, depending on what state you are in, you got to look at those state curriculum standards. But the benefit of what we're going to show you in just a little bit, we're going to show you a few websites you can go to. You can get some curriculum or whatever else that will actually answer some of those questions for you. So don't be overwhelmed. We're going to give you some help. What else? Okay. You could research various homeschool curriculums, websites, and look for those homeschool co-ops in your area. Those are very helpful and very beneficial. We started to homeschool our oldest in 6th grade. In 7th grade, we really reached out to the homeschool co-op in our area, and we stayed with that homeschool co-op all the way until he graduated. Just this spring.
Yeah. And I'll say this, we're going to talk about 5 myths. We read an article that has some myths about homeschooling, so we want to talk about that, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But that will answer the whole importance of a homeschool co-op more in that one. But I think it's very important to not homeschool alone. I know that sounds weird. It's like homeschool is alone. Well, it's actually not.
That's a myth.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that in just a minute.
We'll touch on that later.
All right, list maker, what else you got for us?
Okay, so some websites that we found. We don't want to overwhelm you with a lot of websites. So here's a couple of websites. We already gave you the curriculum standards for Texas website. That's the TEA website. Another homeschool curriculum website is called homeschool.com.
Homeschool.com.
Yeah, it's a great homeschool hub. It has lots of great resources. Ourselves, we kind of did a hybrid with our oldest son. He took half of his classes through a homeschool co-op. They kind of operated more like a private school.
It was at our church. Yeah.
They had teachers who taught them. The class sizes were small. And then we used a completely web-based curriculum called Time for Learning.
Yeah. And that's timeforlearning.com, I think.
Timeforlearning.com. It's time, the number 4, learning.
I'll put it on the bottom of the screen. How about that?
That's what we use for our son because that worked best for him.
Yeah. And we started out early on with a time for learning or another type of online curriculum that did all of his studies and subjects. And then once we got into the homeschool co-op, I think 1 year or 2 years, we did all of his studies in our homeschool co-op. And then we noticed that you kind of play with the situation and figure out what's best.
The wonderful thing about homeschool,
Yeah.
you can play with it. Just make sure you're not playing with missing out on those curriculum standards. That's the one staple that you have to make sure that you are covering as their instructor. Is you've got to be hitting all those curriculum standards.
Yeah.
And again, that's choosing your homeschool curriculum wisely. You could always do some research on each homeschool curriculum to make sure that they are aligned with your state's curriculum standards.
Yeah.
For Texas, it's the TEKS.
And for those of you who are praying about this, it also needs to align with your spiritual convictions.
Absolutely.
So keep that in mind. We'll give you some help on that. Time for Learning is not a Christian curriculum base. It's just a generic curriculum base, but it's a great option. So we did some through Time for Learning and the spiritual side, when it came to, for us, the sciences and, some of the histories or whatever, that we wanted to have a little bit more of a biblical bent to it, Bible class. We were able to choose that through our homeschool co-op and other things. One of the benefits of homeschooling, and again, this video is not designed to encourage you to homeschool. I want to say I'm going to discourage you from homeschooling if you don't feel like that's what God has called you to do.
Absolutely.
But if you feel like God is calling you to homeschool, there are benefits to that.
Absolutely.
One of them is just the excitement of being able to choose the curriculum that your child gets to learn. You get to choose that. So that's fun.
You have that flexibility.
Yeah. All right. What else?
Okay. So far I've given you 2 websites, tea.texas.gov. Another website is homeschool.com. And the third website that we're going to give you is K-12 Online Schools.
Yeah.
Now, why don't you talk to them a little more about what that is?
Okay. So if you go to homeschool.com, you can actually access Time for Learning. You can access the K-12 online. But one of the things that we thought it's important for those of you who are watching, if the reason, when we ask that question, why, if the reason you are wanting to homeschool is because of the inconsistency that this next year may bring, or not knowing for sure what the future holds, which, by the way, none of us do. Yeah. But maybe you're saying, I want to give my son or my daughter consistency from the beginning to the end this next school year, but I don't necessarily want to take them out of public school, or I don't want to take them out of public school for the rest of their educational career. So what I'm going to do is pull them out for a year or 2, whatever it may be, but then I'm planning on taking them back into public school when this whole COVID situation dies down. If that's you, then K-12 is probably the best option for you. It's free. It's public school that's done online. That's done in the home. So you can start public school right now. This is once you go to K-12, I think it's start.k12.com, and you can select what state you're in. That's one of the benefits to this particular curriculum. You select the state that you're in, and it will give you certified teachers. It will give you the curriculum that lines up with your state's curriculum standards.
Takes all of
the guesswork out.
It allows your child to seamlessly go back into
that's the most important thing.
Back into an actual building, because this is public school. It's just done at home. Now, keep in mind also that many school districts, including the one that I work for, is they are offering the parents the choice. How do they want their child to school? Do they want them to be in class, or do they want them to be at home? And the district will provide your student's instructor and everything that your student will need to make sure that you're covering all the TEKS, and it will actually be the teacher teaching the student. Now, I do know that it will be more rigorous than it was in the spring. It'll be more than just pass and fail. But that's what this K-12 will be as well.
Yeah. And with that, if you're planning on remote teaching your student, or having remote learning, but they're still signed into the public school, you're going to want to have a designated work area that is consistent and is only for school, because if it's also for school and play, your kid will never learn. They will actually be more focused on play than school.
It'll be harder for them to make that transition into learning time and set
Yeah.
that apart from playtime.
Yeah, and that doesn't matter what age you are. And getting up at a consistent time every day, getting dressed every day, eating breakfast every day, just going through the normal routine, just a routine as if,
Yes.
and that's with homeschool as well. Just get into a routine. This is education. You have certain days that you will educate and you have other days that you won't. Just be consistent. Consistency is the most important thing. But I did want to point out the K-12 online, because if you are a parent that says, I'm going to pull them out for a year or two, but I'm going to put them back in. If you stay with the K-12 material, then they're not falling behind on what they're going to be learning. If you are saying, I think we're just going to go until our son or daughter graduates, you have a little bit more flexibility there, because you don't have to worry about whether or not they're falling behind in the style and curriculum that they're learning at public school. You have a choice to choose whatever curriculum you have.
Absolutely.
And you won't be falling behind. It'll just be different. It'll be learning a little bit differently.
Yeah. You'll just be on maybe a little bit of a different schedule. You may be learning about planets in the first semester and life cycle in the second semester, whereas a public school, they may have just flipped that. So you'll be learning the same thing as long as you are aligned with the curriculum standards of your state. I'm going to keep on saying that because that's important.
Well, and it's helpful because it helps the student be accepted into college. We just went through that with our son, and he's college bound in a couple of weeks, so we're excited about that. But we did realize, wow, we're glad that we kept proper records. We're glad that we
keep
followed,
records.
everything.
Another thing, whenever you do your research, it would be a really good idea to choose a homeschool curriculum that actually keeps your records for you.
Yeah, that's true.
So that whenever you go to make that transcript, you have all the records right there.
Yeah, that's true. And the beauty of a homeschool co-op that's organized like the one we had, they also keep records for you as well. So homeschool co-op's huge.
I will say one more thing about the K-12 online schools is that it is the public school system. So your child will be required to do any and everything that a child inside a school building is required to do.
Yeah.
That includes state mandated testing. For Texas, it's the STAR test. So keep that in mind as well.
Because that may be another reason why you choose not to homeschool or not to public school or whatever. So you got to keep that in mind. The K-12 would require that. Time for learning, not necessarily.
Not necessarily. No.
Other Christian curriculum options that are out there wouldn't require that. So just keep that in mind as well.
Okay,
all right, we've got a few more minutes, so let's talk about some myths about homeschooling our kids. So there's an article that I read online at familyeducation.com. And we're not getting paid for any of these pushes. We're just throwing some ideas out there for you to kind of do some research. Google homeschooling options in your area, whatever, maybe do as much research as you can.
Let's just hit on a couple of those.
Yeah. So first myth is, and these are myths, by the way. First myth is homeschoolers are stuck in their house all day.
We found that to be not true.
Yeah.
With our own experience as well as with other friends that we know, you actually have more freedom and more flexibility to say travel. Perry got to do a lot of traveling with you during homeschool. He wasn't stuck in a school building all day.
It was rough. So I travel a lot, and so when I'd be out and about, the beauty of homeschooling is he could come with me as long as he had his material and he took some time to do it. You could do it morning, noon, or night. And now it's important to be consistent, but there were those times that you have flexibility and freedom to say, hey, Dad's going to be out for a few days. Why don't you come with me? And then you've got father-son.
You got a lot of father-son time, very, very special times.
Yeah. And not only that, but when you choose to homeschool, you do say, I've got, we need to learn about science or whatever it may be. Well, let's go to the local planetarium or let's go to the local museum and we can learn. So then you're getting them out and you're actually able to do more field trips if you have the free time to do that. So so that is a myth. You don't have to be stuck at home. Myth number 2 and 3 are kind of together. Homeschoolers don't have friends. And myth number 3,
not true.
kids can't be socialized if they don't go to school. So those two they go together there.
Again, it's your child will have the opportunity through homeschool to pursue their interests, and then they're going to be with other students who have like interests like they do. And so that is simply, it is a myth. They have plenty of opportunities to have friends, get involved in a homeschool co-op, lots of different ways that you can choose to homeschool your child.
Being in student ministry for the number of years that I was in student ministry and that we were in student ministry, we saw a lot of students who were even at public schools who always felt lonely. So just because you're in a room with a lot of people, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not lonely. And I say all that to say this, that when it comes to socializing or being alone or whatever it may be, it's the student, it's the personal individual, and you as a parent saying, hey, we're going to make sure that we go to church on a regular basis. We're going to get involved in a homeschool co-op so that we do have, because there are some truths to that.
Absolutely.
You can be all alone. You may not have any friends, but that can happen in public school, that can happen in private school, that can happen in homeschool. It's all a matter of you choosing to get around people and actually getting involved in a homeschool co-op, a certain group, extracurricular activities.
You have to foster those social, emotional skills.
Yeah. And so it takes work, no matter if you're public school or private school, but you can socialize even as a homeschooler. So to keep that in mind. Myth number 4, average parents are not qualified to teach their children. What do you think about that, teacher?
I don't agree with that at all. I have a lot of my parents are very qualified. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's curriculums out there for you. You just simply follow that curriculum. You have to do the research ahead of time and then just follow the curriculum.
Yeah. I'll say this. Know your weakness. Like for me and my wife both, we decided that once our son got to a certain age, math was not an option for us. So we were going to outsource that particular subject. Okay. Now we could help, but there are so many curriculums that are out there today that are video driven. So, and like even with the K-12 stuff, there's state certified teachers that help facilitate that. So you're not doing it all on your own. It's not like you have to be the Amish person who just steps back and is making their own clothes or whatever it may be. You have the freedom to choose a curriculum that's going to be best for you and your kiddo, and they can educate for you. So that's a myth as well. If you feel like God is calling you to do something, he's going to empower you to do it. So just keep that in mind. If you feel like God's calling you to homeschool, he's going to empower you to homeschool as well. And that may mean finding a homeschool co-op where maybe I'm not good at math, but another teacher or another parent in that homeschool co-op, they are good at math. And so we're going to let them teach that. And then myth number 5, homeschooled teens miss out on the high school experience. Homeschooled teens miss out on the high school experience, whatever that is, right?
We were talking about this earlier and we sort of laughed about it. I wouldn't go back to my high school years. I wouldn't want to redo that. I mean, high school was fun, but I wouldn't want to go back and redo all of that over again. And I don't know any of my friends that idolize their high school years and that high school experience as the pivotal moment of their lives that made all the difference. And you know, and so we kind of laughed about that one.
That was an interesting myth, a funny myth. Because you're right. Like we have to first define what do we mean by high school experience? But like you said, those were not my glory days. If high school was your glory days, if high school was somehow something that you just always wish that you could went back, that's like the Uncle Rico in Napoleon Dynamite, right? Nobody wants to be Uncle Rico, so don't be Uncle Rico. But if those were your glory days, then that says something about where you are right now. My best days are ahead of me. Our best days are ahead of us. So I don't think they're going to miss out on the high school experience. Not only that, but I had some really good friends in high school, but I don't hang out with any of them. Not because I don't like them. I still stay connected to them on Facebook
through social media, but you know, and that's another myth. That's just something that that's really an ignorant quote, because again, you do your research. There are there's prom. A lot of homeschoolers, they actually have prom, and it's a big prom with lots of people.
Especially when you're involved in a homeschool co-op or a church-related group. That's why it's so important to stay connected to your church, stay connected to a homeschool co-op, because you do have a lot of options for sports. You have a lot of options for proms. other dances and other things like that. So there are so many things out there that if you just do a little research, you'll be able to find it. Now, as we get ready to wrap up, I want to be clear. This video is not designed, this podcast is not designed to encourage you to homeschool. I'm going to discourage you from homeschooling if you don't feel like that's what God is calling you to do. But if you do feel like God's calling you to do that, there are a lot of options out there. These are just a few myths among many myths when it comes to homeschooling. Don't be afraid to do what God has called you to do. There are a lot of resources out there. We highly encourage you to look those up. But I'll just say this in closing. There is no perfect system anywhere, and specifically educational system. Public school is not perfect. We know that. But private school is not perfect either. And homeschool is not perfect either. There's no perfect system, but you do get to choose your problems. I'm going to say that again. There's no perfect system, but you get to choose your problems. So the question that I want to leave you with is, which problems are you willing to live with the most? Which problems can you accept the most? And that's what you have to answer. And that's why I think it's important to pray about it, because each person, each family is different. Each child's different. And so it's a matter of what God is calling you to do. And if he's calling you to homeschool, do it with your whole heart. Don't neglect it. It's a gift and an extreme privilege to be able to pour into your kiddos. But you can still pour into your kiddos. You can still invest in your community if you go to public school. You can still be just as spiritual if you go to public school as if you go homeschool or private school. That's another myth, by the way, that if I want to be spiritual, I have to homeschool or have to send my kid to a Christian school. That's not the case. I know a lot of people who public school their kiddos, but they are a very spiritual family and they're doing a great job as well. So whatever God is calling you to do it well, rely on him and rely on his support system, which he's given you, which is the body of Christ. Sarah D, is there anything else that you want to share with us, or you good to go?
I think that's good.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this episode.
Thank you for having
you made
me.
it look a lot better. I'll tell you that. If you are listening to this or you're watching this and you've really enjoyed this conversation, and or you know some family members, some friends or some family members that would benefit from this conversation, and they're really praying about it or wrestling with what it means to homeschool, and you think that this episode would be a good episode for them to watch, I highly encourage you to share it on social media, text it to them, make sure that you subscribe to this channel. But as always, make sure that you fight for your family today.
You have been listening to the Fighting Families podcast with Preston Cave. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes each week. If you like today's program, we want to encourage you to share it with your friends and family members. To learn more about the resources we have to offer, visit us at www.fightingfamilies.com. Until next time, be sure you fight for your family today.